Today we have a presentation about cardiovascular endurance training. It will be a theoretical part, that will be my part. And when we talk about cardiovascular endurance training, you have to discuss the energy systems in muscles. When you are active as a patient, your body needs energy and is using energy, and energy is provided in a form of ATP. And there are several energy systems that provide this energy, so you can move over a certain amount of time. In the energy systems that we're going to discuss is the creatine phosphate system, the anaerobic glycolysis, the aerobic glycolysis, and the burning of fatty acids. When you look at this next picture, you see the energy systems all combined, and most important is the pink line above. And you should realize that everybody is able to perform shortly on high energy levels at the beginning, and the longer activity lasts, the less active you can be. It will take lesser energy, or you can use lesser energy when you perform over a longer amount of time. So that's what the pink line says. At the beginning, you are explosively high energy level, full power, and when it endures, you're not able to provide as much power because you have to endure it. I will come back with this picture now and then after each energy system that we will discuss, so it will be clear which one we have discussed about. Everything starts actually with ATP, and that stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's the so-called fuel for the muscles. It's actually the only fuel that the muscles know. So you probably know that when you take in energy in the forms of sugar, or you take in energy from fat, it's transformed into ATP. And ATP itself has, that's why the 3 stands in the ATP for, it has 3 high energy phosphate molecules, and those phosphate molecules provide the actual energy within the muscle cells. Each muscle has already a limited amount of ATP directly stored within the muscle fiber itself, within the cell itself, which is directly available for the first action. But then you talk about the first 2-3 seconds of movement. So when you start a movement, the energy is used, which is already stored within the muscle itself, within the cell itself. Like it said, and I'm looking at the side. Do they see my mouse move on the picture? No, they don't. Okay, that's why. If you look at the yellow arrow, then I will explain what you see in this picture. You see this first yellow line on the left-hand side. You see the energy system within the muscles, the one that ends after 2 seconds. You see it from the upper left corner, and it goes down. After 2 seconds, the energy, the ATP that is already stored within the muscle cells is used up, and then other energy systems have to take over. The second system that becomes active in the movement is the creatine phosphate system. It is a high phosphate source of energy. When it splits up, it supplies actually the ATP that is necessary for energy, and it's actually an enzyme, creatine kinase, is needed to split up the ATP and to free those high phosphate systems. It starts supplying energy after a few seconds. So firstly, you use the ATP within the muscle cell itself, and then the creatine phosphate system takes over. So after 3 to 3 seconds, it has taken over the energy supply from the ATP system, and it ends supplying energy after 30 seconds. It's quite important to realize that if you take a 2-minute rest, this system fully recovers. Fully, you could say up to 89, 99% recovery. So when you do strength exercises like we discussed last week, a lot of strength exercises do not take more than 1.5 minutes of activity, which means that when you do strength exercises, you often using the creatine phosphate system and you're training the creatine phosphate system. Today we talk about endurance, and the reason why I'm covering this is that it's important when you do an exercise program for your patients. It's good to realize, am I working more on muscle function, on strength, or am I working on cardiovascular endurance? And that has an effect on which energy system should be trained. Maybe you remember the training principle of specificity, which I discussed last week. This has something to do with that training principle. If you want to improve your endurance, your cardiovascular endurance, you should also train that system. If you want to train your strength, you should focus on this system that you see over here. So it's all something to be aware of when you make your exercise programs. It's the purple line on the left. You see in the lower left corner, you see that it already starts up when you begin with the activity, but it supplies energy for the most after 2-3 seconds. You see exactly when the ATP, the yellow line, is declining. You see an incline in the ATP creatine phosphate system, and that is at its top level after, let's say, 3 to 4 seconds, and then it reduces again, and after 10 to 30 seconds, it's completely gone. There are some discussions about when and how long they are active, but it's good to realize that it's only active in the first part of the activity. Then we have a glucose system, and as you see in the title, you see two colors. You see gray and blue. They are corresponding to the colors in that graph that I showed before, that I will show afterwards as well. Glucose, sugar, is stored inside the muscles and the muscle cells itself, and in the liver as glycogen. And this system is also known as the burning sugar system. It has a lot of energy. It's quickly available, and it's actually a carbohydrate which is able to supply energy through two systems, because you can burn sugar or can use sugar as fuel by the anaerobic glycolysis when there is no oxygen available for burning the sugar, or the other system is the aerobic glycolysis. In that system, there is oxygen available to burn this sugar and to transform the sugar into ATP. Which system is used depends on the intensity of the activity and the environmental factors. When you are performing up to on higher level intensity, on higher intensity levels, the oxygen cannot be used to burn the sugar itself, and that means that you will go into the anaerobic glycolysis, and I will explain in the next sheets the difference between those two systems. When you talk about the anaerobic glycolysis, it's actually providing energy when energy is needed quickly, and when there's no oxygen available to keep the burning of this energy, to make this burning of this energy possible. You use glucose. Its muscle glycogen will be transformed in a chemical process into pyruvate and energy. You should realize that it starts supplying energy after 10 seconds. So that's when the creatine phosphate system is dropping down, and it ends supplying energy after 1.5 or 3 minutes. In this period, there is not enough time for the blood flow to start going. The microcirculation isn't as active, so oxygen cannot be provided to the muscle cells at that moment. So it needs to be transformed without oxygen. So as a side effect of that biochemical process, pyruvate will be transformed in lactic acid. That's something that we know or we realize in activity. That's the burning sensation that you feel in your muscles. When there are high concentrations of lactic acid in the muscles, it will cause fatigue, and like I said, you will sense that as a burning sensation in your muscles. You can get rid of that lactic acid, and you should get rid of that lactic acid in order to recover and to be able to use that system again. There are different ways when it will be degraded from your body. It will be transported to the blood, and when you have lactic acid in your blood, it's used as fuel for the heart and the brain. Your heart and your brain use lactic acids as a fuel source to get there as energy source for them to be active. And the oxidative muscle fibers, those are the core muscle fibers. The core muscles are using the core muscles are using lactic acid as an energy source as well. Lactic acid is admitted in the liver. Via the blood, it goes to the liver, and in the liver, the liver has in the liver there's a special process. It's called glucogenesis, and there in the liver, the liver regenerates actually the lactic acid and transforms it into glucose again. And in the liver, there's a lot of glucose, sugar stored, and that will be available for future activity. In the muscle fibers itself, the lactic acid can regenerate into glucose again when oxygen is available. The chemical process takes place then within the muscle cell itself and in the fibers. It should be, it is quite important to realize that you can get rid of that lactic acid in the muscles by doing some light exercises. Normally it will take 1 to several hours to get rid of the lactic acid, and this is why is this important to tell. This actually is a proof that after each activity you should do a proper cooling down. So you can be active at high levels. That will lead to a buildup of lactic acid in your muscles, and to get rid of that more properly and most effectively, you should do a proper cooling down in order to get the blood flow going and to get the lactic acid out of the muscles again. If you look at that if you look at the picture again, you see the gray lactic acid system. That's the third gray line. You see the gray arrow pointing out. It starts already supplying energy. It's important to see that there are, if you look at all the energy systems, they're all starting from the beginning of the movement. So there's no such thing as one energy system providing 100% energy in a certain moment of time. When you start moving, all energy systems start up, but the difference is that they start supplying optimum energy at different time levels. It's often forgotten that when you start the movement, the aerobic system is already starting up, and a lot of physios are forgetting and are thinking that there's only one energy system that's providing all of the energy, and that's definitely not true. They're all providing energy up until certain levels, but one of the systems is most active at a certain moment in time. That's good to be aware of. When you look at the aerobic glycolysis, then there is present O2, oxygen is present, the aerobic glycolysis follows on the anaerobic glycolysis. It comes after the anaerobic glycolysis. The aerobic degradability is energetically seen the most profitable fuel system. So when you use your energy sources are burned with oxygen, those systems are the most profitable fuel system. They provide not the most energy at a certain moment of time, but they can provide energy during a longer period of time. And that's why it's most profitable, because in our daily life we actually do not sprint all the time. Daily life asks more endurance, that has a more endurance demand on our systems. The pyruvate that I talked about changes into ATP via the Krebs cycle, and it will go too far to discuss all the chemical reactions within the Krebs cycle. It needs energy, and it's a successive chemical reactions where pyruvate will be transformed into ATP with some side effects and some other chemical materials that will be produced and will be regenerated in the body again. If you want to learn more about that, look up Krebs cycle on the internet, and you will find plenty of information about that. For you as a physiotherapist, it's I think enough to know that in the presence of O2, there's a chemical process. Pyruvate will be changed into ATP, and ATP once again is used as energy source. Myoglobin and hemoglobin are the ones that provide oxygen in the beginning, and in a later stage, the longer an activity lasts, oxygen is supplied from the blood flow itself, and when from the exchange between the muscle cells and the blood flow. It takes some time before the microcirculation adapts, and that could take up to 10 minutes. This is important to realize when you want to focus on an aerobic training. You should also do a proper warm-up of at least 10 minutes. You can use those 10 minutes to get this microcirculation going on, so that your training program will be more effective. If you do a proper warm-up, you prepare the body, you have the microcirculation going on, so you have the possibility for oxygen to be provided at the muscle fibers. So when you start your actual training, you have that oxygen ready in the fibers itself, so you can use the most efficient energy system. Like I said, in the end, you should do a proper cooling down in order to get rid of the lactic acid. If you have been working at high levels, you want to get rid of the lactic acid. The microcirculation is important, and it is important when you work on a so-called steady state activity. Like shown in the graphs, at the beginning of a movement, when you start an exercise, you're able to work on a high level intensities. You can be explosive, you're really strong, you can provide a lot of energy, a lot of power at the beginning of a movement. If you should be able to provide this movement and this power in a certain longer amount of time, you can't deliver that high levels of energy at the beginning. So you should drop down to a lower activity level, and that's called a steady state activity. That's where the O2 system, the aerobic systems are kicking in, because you can use them to endure your exercises. Your breath and your heart frequency will adapt as well, so there will be a sort of balance within the system. The aerobic glycolysis, it starts supplying energy after 1 to 2 minutes. It ends supplying energy after several hours. Like I said, this is the endurance part that we are talking about. You can use this burning of sugar, this the aerobic glycolysis, for 2 hours at maximum speed for well-trained people. When you talk about athletes, they can use this system for up to 2 hours. In untrained people, in patients, it's much shorter. You can't reach the 2 hours from the. You must be able to, or you must think of terms of a half hour up to an hour for inpatient situations. When you used up all your glucoses, first you use up the glucose available in your in the muscle cells itself. Then you use up the glucose that's available in the blood, and when that's not available, it starts the liver starts supplying glucose to the blood. And yeah, when you have used up all 3 glucose sources, this is really important that after the activity you refill your glucose supplies, which means you have to eat. And there is a possibility of people who want to lose weight. There are always 2 discussions. First discussion is you should do endurance exercise for a long amount of time, and you talk about 3 to 4 hours at low intensity levels. In that case, you come to the next energy system that I'll discuss later on. That's the burning of fatty acids. But the second one is this glucose system theory, where you use up all your glucose that you have in your body. And when you do not eat, you will have this feeling of hunger. And when you do not feed yourself with sugars and with food from which sugars can be withdrawn, the body will use fat to produce sugars to refill those glucose supplies. But that needs that asks actually for a mental state, because that means that you must be able to endure that hunger feeling, and that nowadays what is seen as the most effective way to lose weight, to get a high active work on such high levels that you use up all your glucose. You do not feed and do not eat as much sugars after the training than you're used to, so your body will use the fat cells to produce that energy. That brings me to the next one, the burning of fatty acids. When you burn fatty acids, you use oxygen as well. That's why it's called the aerobic burning of fatty acids. It's delivering energy at sub-maximal intensity, and it's mobilized by hormones due to a deficit of glucose. So when there's a shortage of glucose in the body, certain hormones will work to catalyze the effect, and they transform fatty acids into blood sugars. In the energy system picture again, it's the so-called aerobic system. So it's the combination of the 2. You see the blue line. It's able to provide energy at a long amount of time. You see the 2-hour range and even further. But you see when you look at the left-hand side, the percentage of maximum energy production. It's only able to provide, well, let's say about a quarter of the intensity that ATP directly can produce. So when I summarize the characteristics of the energy system, when energy that is supplied for short explosive efforts via the anaerobic systems are produced by the creatine phosphate system and the anaerobic glycolysis, so the anaerobic burning of sugars. The energy is supplied for endurance efforts by the aerobic systems, which is the most energy efficient because you're able to endure these efforts. They are provided by the aerobic glycolysis and by the burning of the fatty acids. Maybe that's good to explain, although there's no response possibility now. But let me explain a little bit about that. When you make an exercise program in a patient situation, you always have a therapeutic goal in mind. When the patient comes in, you do an intake, you check which deficits are seen within the patient, and you make a training program in order to focus on those deficits and to fix the problem of the patient. Patients do not have questions. Most patients who, I have met just a few patients who have physiological knowledge or knowledge of muscles. So a patient doesn't come into your practice or in your clinic with a question of my quadriceps muscle has too less strength, or my endurance capability is at this level, or my creatine phosphate system isn't functioning correctly. That is actually medical knowledge. Patients come in with healthcare seeking questions in order of I'm not able to walk. I'm not able to walk the stairs. I'm not able to sit upright for a certain amount of time. I'm not able to bike to work. I'm not able to perform my work activities. Patients have the healthcare seeking questions of patients are always activity based. And it is our job as a physiotherapist to make a transformation from the healthcare seeking question from the patient to which muscles are active, which energy systems are active, which is there enough mobility. So there's an overlap in basic locomotor properties, which we discussed last week. Because often there's a problem with either muscle coordination or in endurance, that's already mentioned there, in local range of motion. We are the ones that have to make that transfer from their healthcare seeking question to what is actually causing them not to be able to perform on the levels that they wish for. We should be aware of that in order to make a proper training program. That's why we have our assessment tools. One of the best and the most effective therapies that we can provide is exercise therapy. And in exercise therapy, you should focus your therapy on the energy systems, the basic locomotor properties, and the phases of wound healing in order to get the progress going on, in order to get them to the wished levels. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes they have an unrealistic wish. Then you should inform them and look for possibilities and for adaptations to reach as high as possible. But those three items are actually the basics of physiotherapy. You must make the transfer from the healthcare seeking question to energy systems, to basic locomotor properties, and make sure that your training program is actually effective on those subjects that I just discussed. That's why the next part, determination of the training intensity, is quite important, because as you saw in the previous pictures or the previous graphs, if you have to deliver a lot of strength in a short amount of time, the creatine phosphate system is mostly active, which means that if you want to make a training program, you should focus on the creatine phosphate system. If the question of your patient is, I would like to use my bike, to ride my bike to work, and he has to cover, let's say, a 10-kilometer distance from his house to his work, he must be able to bike 10 kilometers, and at average speed, you must be able to. It will take you up to 20 minutes to half an hour. So you must be able to bike for, let's say, half an hour. That, if you want to be active for half an hour, you need the aerobic systems to be active, because they are providing energy in that specific period of time. You do not want to train the creatine phosphate system, because that only supplies energy for, let's say, 30 seconds. So then if you have improved that, then they can have an enormous quick start, but then after a minute they're not able to come up with to deliver the energy that is needed to cover the other 29 minutes, to say so. So that's why I'm discussing these theoretical parts. So let's go back to the training intensity. If there are questions about this, that might be interesting to discuss after this part, because it might become clear here. When you do cardiovascular training, you should realize before the oxidative energy systems adapt, it should take place at least 3 times a week. And the endurance of the time that a training session lasts is at least 20 to 30 minutes, rather 30 minutes than 20. So you should be active 90 minutes minimally in a week. And you should subdivide it in 3 blocks of 30 minutes. And you should bear in mind, maybe I'll jump back to last week's presentation when I discussed the training principle of overload and the training principle of supercompensation. Maybe you remember, when you have this training load, energy will drop, your body will recover, and as a response to that recovery, you get an increase in condition or in fitness. Then you expose them to another load. Energy drops after you being active, your body recovers. So this cardiovascular endurance improvement needs at least 3 training sessions of 30 minutes, that the patient is active for 30 minutes per session. If you do less than this, it's a waste of energy, it's a waste of time, because there will be no changes in the endurance capability of the patient. There's another thing. So this also has something to do with the training principle of frequency. It has something to do with the training frequency. But besides the exposure of 3 training sessions in a week, you should also be aware of that the performance level should be at a certain range. And when you want to work on endurance capability, you want to work on levels between 50 and 85% of the maximum oxygen consumption, the VO2 max. Actually, it's 50 to 85% of the maximum performance of that patient. So there are 2 important things. You have to be aware of the frequency, and you have to be aware of the intensity level of your training. Because when you go to higher intensities, the oxidative system will not be activated. You will jump into the anaerobic activity again. So you will be working on those energy systems that can provide energy for a short amount of time. And that's actually not your goal. There are several methods to determine endurance exercise intensity levels. And I have prepared 4 common methods that are used by PTs here, and not all of the methods are specifically solid, hard measuring methods. Some of them are quick and dirty methods. So those are the ones like the talk test you can use immediately. That gives you an idea about intensity levels. There's the maximum heart rate method that I will discuss. I will talk about the Karvonen method, that's a bit more specific, and the Borg rating of perceived exertion, that's the Borg scales. Those are the ones that I will discuss now. The most simple and most easy method of measuring intensity is the so-called talk test. A patient who is active at light intensity levels should be able to sing while doing the activity. This doesn't mean that you should ask all of your patients to sing when they're exercising in your exercise room, because that will be a mess. But this is all about the level of the intensity. You should be able to have enough breath to sing a song. You don't actually have to sing a song, but it's a way to describe the intensity levels. One who is active at a moderate intensity level should be able to carry on a conversation comfortably while engaging the activity. So instead of singing, what you can do as a physiotherapist, you can start a chit-chat conversation with your patient. When they are able to have a normal conversation with you and respond on your questions, at that moment, when they're able to answer your questions, you should realize that your patient is performing on an aerobic level. When the patient needs to catch his breath or can't speak because there are hiccups in their answer, then you realize that you should realize that the patient has shifted to an anaerobic performance. This is like a very simple, quick test which I use like on a daily basis. When I want to work on aerobic performance in my patients, I start chatting about the weather or about some personal things, or sports are often good topics to discuss. Maybe politics. Just take a topic and have a conversation. When your patient is able to respond without hiccups, without having to catch his breath, you should realize that they're able to function on aerobic levels, and that's what you want with endurance training. So this is a simple and quick test. Then there is a more specified method to determine the training intensity, and that's the heart rate maximum method. And this is a method that comes from sports health, sports medicine, and it originally starts with a maximum effort test. The cardiovascular system is loaded enormously with serious health risks, because maybe you've seen those tests when you have this mask, when all your respiratory gases are measured, and from the amount of oxygen and the amount of CO2, they can determine when you move into anaerobic activity. When your maximum heart rate frequency is unknown, and specifically if you work with heart patients, they often have beta blockers or other medication that will suppress heart rate. If you push them to a maximum, when you look at the heart rate numbers, you might expect them to be able to work at high levels, but you overreaching quite easily when patients are on medication and with heart disease. So you do not want to do an original VO2 max test, because that's just simply too stressing for the patient. There is another way to determine or to calculate and estimate the theoretical maximum heart rate of a patient. And that's a quick method where you can actually calculate it. You can calculate the maximum heart rate by using the number 220, and you withdraw the age of the patient. For training, the heart frequency must be between 60 and 90% of this maximum heart rate frequency for cardiovascular training. And up to 90% is quite high already. But in formula, the training heart frequency is 60 to 90% of the maximum heart frequency. In an example, let's say you have a 50-year-old person, a 50-year-old patient. The estimated maximum age-related heart rate would be calculated as follows. You have 220 minus the 50 years of age. That leaves you up with a theoretical maximum of 170 beats per minute. The older you get, the lower your maximum heart rate will be. So the younger you are, the higher your maximum heart rate is. This is just a physiological principle. I can't change that. There are large inter-individual differences, but this is a quite safe method to calculate a theoretical maximum heart rate, and then based on that theoretical maximum, you use 60 to 90%, and then you have an interval, you have a range of heart rate where your training intensity should be. For this 50-year-old person, the 60 and 90% training levels would be 170 times 0.6, that is your 60%. That leaves you up with a minimum heartbeat range of 102 beats per minute and a maximum level of 170 times 0.90, and that leaves you up with 153 beats per minute. So the training zone for this specific patient would be between, if I'll make it a bit roughly, between 100 and 150 beats per minute in a healthy situation. Like I said, if you're on beta blockers, your maximum heart rate will drop. So if you work with these percentages, then yeah, you might be a bit too high. So always use the talk test as a quick test to realize if the patient's levels are and the training levels are at the correct levels for this specific situation. Then you have the Karvonen method. Is actually a method that is a little bit more accurate than the estimated maximum heart rate method. In formula, the training frequency is in the Karvonen method. They Mr. Karvonen, which is professor from Finland, who came up with this method, and he's taking in account the heart rate reserve within this training formula. Your training frequency is your rest heart rate, so that's measured. Your heart rate in rest is the rate that your the amount of beats per minute when you're in total rest. That's best measured in the morning, just after waking up. But that's quite difficult. Because you don't see your patients every morning just when they wake up. But when you lay down and just for 5 minutes and you just catch your breath and you relax, you can have a quite proper measurement of the rest heart rate frequency. But in the formula you have this heart rate rest value, and you add 50 to 80% of the reserve heart rate, and the reserve heart rate is your maximum heart rate minus your rest heart rate. You get a complete, you get a different calculating formula, and the Karvonen method comes up with a slightly higher intensity than the maximum heart rate estimating value that I just discussed before. This is a more efficient method for advanced patients. So when you start with the patient, please start with the heart rate maximum method. When they have improved in time, you can change to a Karvonen method, because then you can work on a little bit higher levels, which means that your training will be a bit more effective. A calculating example for the Karvonen method: the same 50-year-old person who has a resting heart rate of 50 beats per minute. Well, the estimated maximum age heart rate is the 220 minus 50, the same 170 beats per minute. The maximum heart rate frequency minus the rest frequency is the so-called heart rate reserve. In this case, it's 170 minus 70. So the heart rate reserve is 100 beats per minute. The 50 and 85 levels would be 100 times 0.5 plus 70 is 120 beats per minute. The 90% level, or sorry, that should be the 85% level. I see 90 here on the right, but it's the 85% level. Plus 70 is 155 beats per minute. As you can see, I'll go back. You see the training range 120, 155. And when I go back to the maximum heart rate frequency, you see that 102 to 53. So the lower levels are increased there's a difference between the two methods, that the lower levels are increased in the Karvonen method. Then there's a fourth method. That's the Borg scale of perceived exertion. It's called also the RPE, rate of perceived exertion. It's a scale which helps to determine the intensity, and the intensity can be transferred to other activities. It's very useful when the intensity can't be measured by heart rate due to medication or heart conditions. So for cardio rehabilitation, this is a very nice instrument to work on to find the right training intensity. There are two Borg scales. You have a 0 to 10 scale, and this is the actually original scale that goes from 6 to 20. And the reason why they have two different scales is that the original scale said we don't want a 0 to 10 line because everybody is quite common with 0 to 10 scales, and they are prejudiced by those scales and the experience that they have with 10-point scales from the past. So the information provided will not be accurate enough. When you choose numbers that you do not have experience with, it becomes a more accurate, actually. So I prefer to use this one. But when you look up the Borg scales, you can find a 10-point scale as well. Both scales have differences in intensity. They use the same colors: blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. And the other one goes from blue, green, orange to red. So there is an overlap in both. Like I said, I'm using this one because people don't know the numbers by heart. There are important ratings here in this in this right scale. 9, the number 9 corresponds to very light exercise. For a healthy person, it's like walking slowly at its regular pace for some minutes. 13 on the scale is seen as somewhat hard exercise. It still feels okay to continue the activity, but it's taking you more energy and it's taking you more effort to perform on this level. 17, very hard, is very strenuous. A healthy person can still go on, but one really has to push him or herself to get the action going on. It feels very heavy and the person is very tired. When you reach 19 on the scale, it's an enormous strenuous exercise level. For most people, it's at the level that they have never experienced before. It's when people are close to blacking out and just dropping down on the floor, like the picture on the right. Most patients have never ever reached these levels because it feels uncomfortable and your body is giving you signals and signs already before that you should stop because it's way too intense. When you instruct a patient, when using this Borg scales, it's really important to take the time to instruct your patients. And there are 8 items that you should discuss with your patients. What you should tell your patient is that during the physical activity, we want you to rate your perception of exertion. We want to rate your activity level and how difficult you experience it. This feeling should reflect how heavy and how strenuous the exercise feels to you. So it's all about the sensation, how intense it feels. It's a combination of all sensation: physical stress, effort, and fatigue. And the fourth part is actually quite important. You tell the patient not to be distracted by any other factors as pain or shortness of breath or those kind of things. You only want to know how heavy the exercise is. You tell the patient to focus on the sensation of the central exertion, the whole body fatigue. When you're on a bike or on a treadmill, you might feel the burning in your legs. That's not interesting. You talk about the whole body's fatigue sensation. You ask the patient to look at the rating scale below. You have a scale in your hand, or you show them, and while they are being active, and you ask them to pinpoint either a number or one of the explanations that are written beside the numbers. The range varies from 6 to 20, where 6 means no exertion at all. That's completely in rest, you do nothing. And 20 means maximal exertion, so maximum performance level, the hardest you have ever, hardest exercise you ever performed in your life. Then choose a number from below what describes your level of exercise best. The level chosen will give you a good idea about the intensity level of the activity, and you can use this information to speed up or slow down your activity to reach the desired range. You must be honest, and you must emphasize this to your patient that they have to be honest to the feeling of exertion, the feeling of how heavy it is, and they must be as honest as possible. Without thinking about what the actual physical load is. So they shouldn't look at the amount of watts that you put on a bike, or they shouldn't look at the inclination of a treadmill. They should focus on what they sense, what they feel within their body. It's the solitary feeling of the patient itself, and it's their own feeling of effort, and exertion is important for them to determine their intensity levels. You can't compare intensity levels and what people sense among different patients. So what is heavy for one patient can be very light for another patient. So this is only an exercise level determination for one patient. You should look at the scales and the expressions and then give a number or the text, like I said, and that actually is the score. When you look at the scale on the right hand side, you see the numbers from 6 to 20. 6 is lying down in the bed doing nothing. 20 is being active at maximum level, the hardest effort you have ever experienced. And you probably understand that if you want to work on cardiovascular levels, you should work in the range, in the end of the green range and in the orange, in the orange range. When you go in the upper orange range to red, you do not work on endurance levels anymore. You start working on those other energy systems that I discussed before. This next sheet that I have here, and this graph that I'm showing here, this table that I'm showing, shows an overview and overlap of the different methods. On the left hand side, you see the maximum heart rate frequency method and percentages related to the intensity. In the second row, you see the VO2 max or the heart rate reserve method. That's the Karvonen method. There you see the also the intensity percentages. Then you have 3 rows with the Borg scale, the 1 to 10 Borg scale and the 6 to 20. And you have the Borg scale in words in the 5th row. And as you can see, in the range somewhat hard or average from 12 to 13, that's and up to hard, that's actually the range when you want to work on endurance levels. Then we have the final row, that's for the aerobic training. You see the training goals. The first 2 levels are more focusing on recovery. The middle blue one is the optimum 2 to 3 times a week for at least 20 to 30 minutes activity. That is from heart rate maximum method from 60 to 80% intensity, from Borg scales 12 to 13. And when you move on to the next one, from 14 to 15 on this 6 to 20 Borg scale, that's on heart level, and that's on interval levels. But when you do interval exercises and when you do interval training, you quickly move into anaerobic activity, but you can do aerobic interval training as well. So the range from 12 to 15 should be focused on for training the endurance capability.